Robert Mitchum tells the terrible truth about Charlton H. before he dies. Robert Mitchum was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, on August 6, 1917. His full name is Robert Charles Durr Mitchum. Mitchum's early life was not at all exciting. His childhood was hard because he grew up in a working-class home and moved around a lot. Mitchum's stuntman father and single mother taught him early on about the harsh realities of life, giving him a strong will that would later shape both his personal life and his work. The tough conditions Mitchum grew up in gave him a roughness and authenticity that became his trademark on screen. This was a quality that viewers really connected with during Hollywood's golden age. Mitchum's entry into Hollywood wasn't like most people do. After doing a bunch of different jobs like stuntman and bit player, he slowly started to get noticed because of how powerful he was and how easy it was to recognize his low, resonant voice. In the 1940s, his early movies, like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo 1944 and Undercurrent 1946, showed not only how good an actor he was, but also how quiet and intense he was, which made him stand out from many of his peers. Mitchum's style was subtle, understated, and very modern, unlike the often theatrical acts of the time. He became associated with a certain type of bad guy, characters who were complicated, ethically unclear, and mysterious, but also incredibly real. In the 1940s and 1950s, Mitchum became a big star. In the 1947 classic film noir, Out of the Past, Mitchum played Jeff Bailey, a private detective caught in a web of lies, love, and betrayal. This was one of his most important early parts. He became known as a master of the noir genre because of how well he played the tension, weakness, and hopelessness that the genre called for. With his cool, detached personality and deep emotional depth, Mitchum was the perfect main man for a noir movie. He wasn't just pretending. He gave his characters a life that made them seem real, whether they were troubled loves, smart bad guys, or strong heroes. One of the most impressive things about Mitchum's success was how versatile he was. Even though he was known for playing dark and moody roles, he was also great in westerns, comedies, and musicals. In movies like 1955's The Night of the Hunter, he played the creepily evil preacher Harry Powell, which showed how easy it was for him to scare people. His quiet, silent threat was much scarier than any obvious acting. Mitchum, on the other hand, showed warmth and humor in lighter fare like musicals like The Story of G.I. Joe 1945, which contrasted with his usually serious movie persona. This range not only showed off his huge talent, but also kept him relevant for decades in a film business that was always changing. Off-screen, Robert Mitchum developed an air of defiance and independence that was similar to the characters he played on screen. The people who ran the studios both admired and feared him because of his cleverness, dry humor, and dislike of Hollywood pretense. A history of trouble with the law, a love of fishing and poetry, and an image as a ladies' man all added to Mitchum's mystery. He stayed grounded, unlike many stars of his time, and often went back to a simple, almost private life when he wasn't in the spotlight. His image was never completely made up. Everyone in the audience could tell that every look, stop, and word was real. Mitchum seemed to have a life outside of Hollywood as well. A man who is well aware of the symbols of fame, but is not forced by them. Mitchum had an impact on more than just movies. His voice and delivery influenced many actors, and the way he seemed to be cool all the time became a model for current male behavior in movies. People who directed and worked with him often praised his realistic approach, and said he didn't need much direction because he knew what each scene called for. In a time of high drama and theater, his ability to show depth and feeling without using a lot of words or gestures was groundbreaking. People have always admired him for both his art and his mysterious personality. His style was simple but strong. Robert Mitchum married Dorothy Spence in March 1940. They were married for almost 60 years, and were very important in his complicated but interesting personal life. Dorothy became Mitchum's partner when he was just starting to make a name for himself in Hollywood. She was known for being gentle, grounded, and strong. They got married during the early years of his rise to fame, a time when he was very ambitious at work and very restless in his personal life. Robert and Dorothy had 3 kids together. As kids, they had to deal with the fact that their dad was both a Hollywood star and a man who was often in trouble. Even though they were famous and had to deal with a lot of attention, the couple stayed together and became a family that stayed amazingly intact in public. Robert Mitchum, who was famous for his easy cool on screen, and being Hollywood's classic bad boy, was never a reliable husband, even though his personal choices pushed his marriage to its limits many times. Because of his charm and the strong demands and temptations of the movie business, he had many affairs while he was married. People in Hollywood knew about these affairs, and they were often written about in tabloids as examples of a man who lived his life by his own rules and didn't care about what other people thought. Even though he had a lot of relationships with other women, Dorothy Spence stayed his faithful partner. She handled his cheating with class and discretion, which showed how good she was as a person and may have hinted at a more difficult love that held them together. Robert and Dorothy's marriage lasted an amazing almost 60 years, which is a huge accomplishment in a field known for short-lived relationships and frequent divorces. The couple lived through the ups and downs of Hollywood from the day they got married in 1940 until Mitchum's death in 1997. During that time, Mitchum had scandals, court problems, and the stresses of fame. Not only does Dorothy's long marriage show how patient and strong she is, but it also shows how complicated Mitchum's personal code is. Even though he was often self-centered, he knew how important his family was and promised to be with Dorothy forever. The way they stuck together for so long is one of the most amazing, if not unusual, love stories in Hollywood history. A relationship that lasted through decades of temptation, fame, and Mitchum's flaws, ending only when he died at age 79. Prior to his passing, Robert Mitchum, the famous actor known for his gruff voice, gloomy good looks, and easy coolness, said a few things that caused waves in Hollywood. Mitchum was known for being honest, not trying to fit into the Hollywood image machine, and being ready to say what he really thought about the business and the people who worked there. When he talked about fellow actor Charlton H. during a talk that would become one of Mitchum's last interviews, he said some very direct things that surprised many people. Chilton wasn't always what he seemed like on screen or at public events, Mitchum said. He was admired by many, but most people never saw another side of him. People quickly paid attention to this, because Charlton H. was seen as the perfect example of honesty and classic Hollywood heroism, because of his towering height, deep voice, and famous roles in movies like The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur. Mitchum's words made it sound like there were layers behind the well-crafted public image that were rarely talked about and might have been misunderstood. Not only did Mitchum know the person, but he had worked in the entertainment business for decades and had to deal with studio politics, fame, and personal rivalries. This gave him a unique view. He said that we worked with the same people and went to the same parties and openings, so you got to know them. When the cameras aren't running, you know who they are. And not everything lives up to the legend. This realization showed a greater truth about Hollywood. There is a gap between what people think and what really happens. Mitchum was admired for a long time for being able to mix fame with a healthy dose of defiance. Unlike many of his peers, who carefully managed their public image, Mitchum was delightfully real, and sometimes rudely so. His bluntness when talking about hate showed that he believed that being honest, even if it made people feel bad, was more important than keeping their identities safe. The actor went even further, showing parts of H's nature that most people outside of the group might not have known. Mitchum remembered that he could be very attractive, but there were times when he was stubborn, cocky, and obsessed with control, which made him hard to deal with. In this case, Mitchum wasn't making a personal attack. Instead, he was talking about a complicated person who was dealing with the stresses of fame, politics, and public expectations. In his later years, H was very active in politics, especially with the National Rifle Association. This made the man behind the parts less visible. Mitchum's comments made it sound like these traits were present and important even when they only met for film-related reasons in the past. They were also affecting his relationships and interactions in the industry in a subtle way. In addition, Mitchum talked about the nature of friendships and competition in Hollywood, where friendships could be as fake as they were real. A lot of people think the stars get along, but he said it's really more about business than friendships. It was the same with Charlton. You never know for sure who is your friend and who is just acting. Mitchum brought up an important part of celebrity society that many outsiders didn't understand: the fuzzy line between being real and performing, even among people who are thought to be friends. The truth wasn't meant to ruin H's reputation. It was meant to make him more real, to show that beneath the heroic exterior there was a person with the same flaws, fears, and goals as everyone else. Lastly, Mitchum's thoughts were tinged with a sad knowledge of his own death. He seemed to be thinking about more than just H when he talked right before he died in 1997. He was thinking about life, legacy, and remembering in general. I've been around for a long time, so I can see the cracks in people's masks. I know that what you read in mags or see in interviews isn't always what they're really like. There's something else there, something much more human. And in a way, his views were his last gift. They reminded people that movie and stage heroes are not perfect icons, but real people with complicated lives that are often hidden from view. At the end of Robert Mitchum's life, the bad habits and image of a hard-living star that had made him famous caught up with him in a way that could not be undone. Mitchum smoked a lot for most of his adult life. He started smoking a lot of cigarettes a long time before most people knew how bad tobacco was for them or learned about them in public. Like many artists of his time, he smoked all the time on set, in interviews, and in his personal life. A cigarette was often as natural in his hand as the simple grin or half-lit gaze that became his trademark. Mitchum didn't just smoke because he liked to. It became part of the legend of his screen persona, adding to the tough, worn-out manliness that people found so appealing in noir, westerns, and war movies. But as the years went by, it became hard to ignore the damage that decades of heavy smoking had done to the body. In his later years, Mitchum was diagnosed with lung cancer, a terrible disease that slowly made the actor less strong. He had once seemed almost unbreakable. People who knew him well noticed that his health was steadily getting worse, with him feeling tired, having trouble breathing, and becoming more fragile, which was very different from the strong personality he had shown for most of his work. For a man whose image was built on being tough, calm, and emotionally stable, the disease was a cruel enemy that took away his vitality while mostly keeping his sharp wit and dry sense of humor. Mitchum dealt with his illness with the same blunt truth that he had used for most of his life. People didn't think he loved his pain or tried to get them to feel sorry for him, and he rarely used emotional language when talking about his health. He instead faced the results of his actions with an honest sense of fate, knowing that the habits he had been practicing for decades were now paying off. His philosophy, which included not pretending to be innocent while also being honest about life's darker truths, was mirrored in this acceptance. Robert Mitchum died in Santa Barbara, California, on July 1, 1997. He had problems from lung cancer that made his death inevitable. He was 79 years old. His death marked the end of an age in Hollywood. It was a time when movie stars were huge but deeply flawed, and when personal flaws were often linked to creative genius. When news of his death spread, many actors, filmmakers, and critics wrote tributes, many of which praised not only his immense ability but also the unique presence he brought to the screen. People remembered Mitchum as an actor who could show fear, tenderness, irony, and exhaustion with just a small change in his face. His performances felt real, not staged.